Greg and Richard right here on Talking Red.
Hello and welcome to Talking Reds, a Nottingham Forest podcast, hosted by myself, Greg Oram, and my fellow Forest fanatic all the way across the Atlantic, Mr. Richard Spray. How you doing, buddy? You okay?
Yeah, I'm hanging in there. Looking forward to this one. Yeah, a lot happening, but we got one of the best voices to share this information that we need to hear and keep us up to speed on the city ground. So, really excited to have Matt back on.
Excellent. So, no hot water, poor match day experience, lack of ladies' toilets, and an outdated stadium that, in spite of all its character and charm, is badly in need of an upgrade that keeps the atmosphere and magic alive. It's been a saga and a half, but local residents are not happy, as final approval has been granted to make it finally happen. Here to provide an expert overview and insight into all the latest developments on the city ground, we're thrilled to welcome Matt Drewitt back to the channel for the third one with the architect.
Callum Hudson-Odoi, acres of space. Hudson-Odoi! Forest on fire! And don't they mean it? On this most sumptuous of days, this most sumptuous of Forest campaigns has yet one more highlight.
I thought that was one of the top three highlights at the City Ground last season, the Callum Hudson-Odoi goal against Manchester City. So I picked that one especially. Matt, it's great to have you back with us. Real big friend of Talking Reds and resident expert on all things architecture. How are you doing, Matt?
I'm very well, thank you, chaps. Thank you so much for having me back on. Lots to talk about, lots of updates, and really exciting times ahead, I think, for Forest on and off the pitch.
Indeed, on and off the pitch, absolutely. Don't forget to get involved in the comments and let us know that you are here. Please do pop any questions from Matt into the chat and we will do our best to pose some of them to him. Also, if you would be so kind,
please do go ahead and hit like and subscribe to be sure not to miss any future episodes from Talking Reds.
Okay, let's get into it. So what do we know? We know that it's been a saga, Matt. We know that things didn't get signed in 2019, and we know that there were plans coming out that looked great and everyone got excited. We know that Tom Cartledge was brought into the club and made chairman, and that seemed to spark a possible move away from the City Ground. And Toten, that no one ever spoke about, was now the most spoken about thing in Nottingham and certainly in West Bridgford. And you know, it all just seemed to become very confusing for the people or the red side of Nottingham, certainly. And lots of worry and lots of fear and lots of arguments. And then you came into our kind of universe a little bit, going back a year or so, when you just, you know, put forward, this is what I'd do. If there were all the things we could do on the table, this is what I'd do if I possibly was going to put forward a suggestion, and you come up with your fantastic vision of what a brand new City Ground could be. And that really kind of caught my imagination. And I know Richard as well. And we talked about that on the first time you came in. And since then, it's kind of things have moved along, and it felt like the Toten idea wasn't going to happen. And it was very much staying at the City Ground. And then is it going to be a flattening and starting again? Or is it going to be a rebuild of any kind? It seems, and it's going to be now, then it's going to be back to plan A, which was update the Peter Taylor and then go from there with the Bridgford stand and maybe looking at the Brian Clough and just keeping that atmosphere and that magic that everyone is so desperate to cling on to. And there's been so much backwards and forwards with this council and that council, because there's more councils involved than anything. And local residents, you kind of have to understand that, you know, they're going to be upset about this. A lot of them aren't Forest fans. Some will say, well, the ground's been there since 1889, I think it is, or something like that. You know, when you moved there 22 years ago, you might have known what you were getting yourself in for. But, you know, that's another story perhaps, and we'll have some more of that chat along the way. But the good news from a Forest point of view, Matt, is that things are now going forwards. I'm going to hand over to you. and you, in your perfect and expert way, will take us through how you perceive this latest update.
Thank you, Greg. So I guess if we start with the slides, the first sort of question I've posed is, has the Peter Taylor stand got planning permission? So this is the sort of marquee question. So if we go to the next slide, full planning permission was finally granted last Monday. So on Monday, the 7th of July, Rushcliffe uploaded this document on the right, which is called a notice of planning permission. And effectively what that does is it grants the club planning permission for the Peter Taylor stand and the plaza, and the outline permission for the residential block and the commercial elements. So as you'll all be aware, you've probably read in the press, the full planning application concerning the stand contains a great deal of detail and has been worked on rigorously over the sort of 6 years since it was first announced. And the outline permission for the residential block, which sits where the current club shop is, effectively is brought forward in limited detail, with some of those details to come forward in time. So that's why the two are separate. And as I say, that was granted last Monday, and that indicates therefore that the club and the stakeholders have actually finally signed the Section 106 agreement, which was also uploaded to the planning portal on Monday, the 7th of July. So what this does is this kickstarts from Monday, the 7th of July, 3 years. It's like a stop clock for the club to begin work on the Peter Taylor stand. So they don't need to finish it, but they need to start it on or before Friday, the 7th of July, 2028. So if we go to the next slide, this is the overall city ground master plan. And what I've done there is just indicate on those plans where those two parts of the development sit. So label 1 is obviously the new Peter Taylor stand, and label 2 is where the residential apartment block will sit. And in between them is that plaza space. And if we go to the next slide, I'll explain, and I want to sort of be clear, really. I don't want to sort of go over the dry stuff, because I think, that's sort of for the detailed part. But to understand the conversation we're going to have later on, we need to just discuss a few of the regulatory processes and the legal processes that a planning application has to go through. So first one is, what is a planning committee? So if we go to the next slide. So a planning committee is effectively a group of local politicians. They're the ones that you elect to your councils, and a group of them sit on a panel known as a planning committee. And what they're responsible for is effectively determining the outcome of planning applications of a particular size. And the Peter Taylor stand and the residential block application is an example of such a thing that they would determine. So on the 28th of July, 2022, that planning committee was held on the plans for the Peter Taylor stand and that residential apartment block, and they did resolve to grant that application permission. But that was on the basis that the Section 106 agreement would be signed. And in doing so, that would enable the Director of Development and Growth at Rushcliffe Borough Council the opportunity, or the ability rather, to grant planning permission. And that didn't happen in 2022. The reason why is because the Section 106 agreement was never signed. So in that intervening 3 years, lots of negotiations have gone on between all the stakeholders, all the councils and the club to resolve what's known as the detail in the Section 106 agreement. So if we go to the next slide, I'm just going to outline what a Section 106 agreement is and what it's used for. So if we go to the next slide, basically a Section 106 agreement is a form of legal agreement between a collection of stakeholders involved or affected by development. In this case, Forest and the councils and various other stakeholders, including the boat clubs, for example. And what they do is, or what it does rather, is it serves to mitigate the impact of a development on the local community and the environment. So it effectively acts as an insurance policy. It makes sure developers contribute to infrastructure, to local services, and any other measures needed to make a development acceptable in planning terms. So what Forest have done is they've agreed to contribute to items such as pedestrian crossing upgrades, affordable housing, improvement to local allotments, footpaths, and bus services, just as a selection, but there are more. It also includes conditions for development subject to the replacement of the Britannia Boathouse, which we'll touch upon a little bit later. But that's a specific condition, which is a sort of major condition on the ability to actually commence the construction of the Peter Taylor stand. So if we go to the next slide, explaining what a planning condition actually is. So go to the next slide. So a planning condition, or planning conditions rather, are restrictions and covenants and requirements imposed by the local planning authority when permission is granted. And what they're designed to do is to make a development acceptable by controlling aspects of the project. So this includes things like when construction can start, what materials can be used, how the site has to be used. A good example of this, if those of you that are following the construction or reconstruction rather of the Camp Nou in Barcelona, initially that project was working, I think, 5 days a week in sort of typical working hours. It's now operating 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And that's a change in that condition that the local authority in Barcelona have allowed to enable that project to progress quickly. That won't be the case in the Peter Taylor stand, but that's an example of what a condition does. And it sort of restricts certain things in the process for the betterment of the local community, local residents, as an example. So essentially, that ensures the development aligns with planning policies and minimizes any other negative impacts. Next slide, please. Has the boat club issue been resolved? So this is a big one. So this is the boat club indicated there with BH. And there are 4 boathouses next to the Trent end and sitting adjacent behind the sort of Peter Taylor stand, proposed Peter Taylor stand. And the one indicated is the one that the club wish to demolish. So if we go to the next slide, the simple answer to that question is not to our knowledge yet. So that issue has not been resolved yet, but there are some positives. So the section 106 contains a covenant which reads, the first owner agrees that they will not demolish the Britannia Boathouse unless and until the replacement facilities have been provided. So what that effectively means is until the club have found another site, agreed that with the boathouse, agreed that with the council, purchased that site, applied for planning permission for a replacement boathouse on that site, and then actually built that site, they can't commence the construction of the Peter Taylor stand. So that's a fairly big red herring, but it's one that could be got over relatively quickly, I believe, in time for when they need to start next year.
Just interrupting you for 1 second. Michael asks in the comments that can the boat club, dig their heels in basically and say that that's not suitable, that's not suitable, that's not suitable, and therefore it just drags on and on and on.
That's something I'm not entirely clear on myself. I suppose from a sort of legality perspective, yes, but I imagine the process would have to be negotiated and led by the council and the planners and any other stakeholders at the council that are driving this. And I imagine, just reading between the lines of what was said at the planning committee, that some of those conversations look to have commenced already. And it does seem that in agreeing to this point in the section 106, that the boat club have accepted that needs to be demolished and they need to have another facility provided. But yes, in theory, I suppose that could drag on for some time. But I think, providing that the negotiation is led in good faith, that a resolution to that could be found relatively quickly. Positively, the stakeholders have agreed that the Britannia Boathouse may be demolished and on the premise that it's replaced, as I've just said. And planning officers have indicated that no development is able to commence until such time that a replacement boathouse has been granted planning permission, as we've just outlined. And at the time of the committee, planning office indicated that there are no details of the new facilities or their potential new location. But that's not to say that that hasn't been discussed offline. It's just that they're not in the public domain yet. So this one feels like a big one, and a lot of progress has been made on this, but there's still some way to go.
And just to confirm, it says that you can't start any work on the Peter Taylor, not only until the planning permission for the boathouse is in place, but construction has been completed on the boathouse. That's right, isn't it?
Correct. Yeah. So what's not clear is whether, for example, the club could demolish the Peter Taylor stand as the replacement boathouse is going up, and they sort of program it such that that one's coming down as this one's going up, that one finishes as this one's kind of hitting the ground, and then they get that one signed off, they get the approval for that all signed off, it's all, you know, fine, hunky-dory. Those guys can move in there and start using it, which then enables them to start constructing the new one. So what's not entirely clear is whether they can bring down the existing Peter Taylor stand whilst the boat club's going up. That's not entirely clear to us. But either way, yes, you're correct. That one does need to be up, finished and operational before they can start constructing the new Peter Taylor stand. So that is a big one, and that needs to be resolved relatively swiftly if they want to start constructing this or demolishing at least next season at the end of the season coming.
So is there going to be some type of proximity expectation, I think, in terms of where they are? Because obviously they're in a favorable position now, being where they are right next to the ground. So do you think that there's even remotely a chance that there's anything around the ground right now where they could relocate?
Possibly, Richard. Yeah, there's obviously some other clubs behind the Brian Clough. I doubt they'd be able to find space there and construct a new one there, or whether any of those clubs would consider a merger. I think that would propose challenges. I think it would be likely that they'd head further towards Home Pierpont, or maybe somewhere on the other side of the Trent. But yeah, this is not an easy thing to overcome. It's highly likely it could be dealt with in the next year, but it's going to be a big challenge. And if they don't deal with it in the next year, that's going to push the program back even longer.
But you mentioned on point sort of 2 or 3 things. You say positively the stakeholders. Are you referring to the stakeholders in the boathouse have agreed that the boathouse may be demolished on the premise that it's replaced? So is that right? It seems on the face of it that Britannia is saying, okay, we'll go with it. You can demolish our boathouse, but you got to build a kick-ass brand new one.
Exactly, yeah. So what the Section 106 has done, and I believe everyone has signed and agreed to, which obviously triggered that issuing of the planning notice, is that the stakeholders, everyone involved, that's Forest, that's the council, that's the boat club, have agreed that, yes, they can demolish that boathouse on the provision that it's re-provided elsewhere, subject to the satisfaction of the council and, of course, the boat club, and that it's operational. So it's ticking a number of those boxes. And
it could well be that they see this as an opportunity at Britannia and say, well, you know what, we've got to move. We don't really like it, but let's embrace it. And we could, you know, have a really good facility that we don't have at the moment. So, you know, there's positives hopefully for them. Okay, do you want the next slide?
Yes, please. Thank you, Greg. So yeah, this one gets bandied around a lot online. Have the plans changed? The next slide. No, the plans have not changed for the stand. The plans brought forward to committee in 2022 for the stand remain the same. The overall capacity of the ground will increase by circa 5,000 people to around 35,000 seats. There are currently no plans in the public domain for an expanded Bridgford end. I know it's been discussed, but there are no plans in the public domain. And there's also no lawful agreement in the form of a planning permission or an application that's in progress for any of those parties to agree to expand the city ground up to 50,000. So any future expansion plans will require fresh planning applications and have to go through the exact same process that the Peter Taylor has.
Well, looking forward to that one. That might take another 15 years.
Is it possible to alter the current Peter Taylor stand design? This is one I see online a lot. The simple answer is yes, but to some extent. So planning authorities are able to approve alterations to designs, and they do it all the time. So when plans are submitted to the planning portal, they're inputted at what we call a concept stage. So it's kind of like halfway between the project starting and halfway between the project finishing. And in between that time between planning being granted and the project finishing on site, you appoint a contractor, you start to go through value engineering processes, all of these kind of considerations, develop design, that all gets taken into account. And sometimes that has an impact on the plans, but there's a limit to what can be changed. So what they're known as is either a non-material amendment or a material amendment. And I know that's probably quite boring for people to get their head around, but effectively a non-material amendment is a small change and a material amendment is quite a significant change. And it's up to local planning officers to decide which one of those it is and which way the process can go. Now, NMAs get entered in all the time. You know, little things creep up as a design develops. You know, maybe they put a kitchen in somewhere and there's a vent that they hadn't accounted for on a facade. So they need to get that into the planning system. They're relatively minor, but significant changes to the design, such as the facade, the look and feel of the facade changing, or expanding certain areas or changing the use of certain parts, that's going to fall generally under what we would call a material amendment. Added to that, I've said that Forest are unlikely, in my opinion, to be able to increase the capacity of the Peter Taylor stand without submitting a fresh planning application. And the reason I say that is it's not just the plans that have to be considered, it's all of the reports. Now, anyone who's actually ventured onto the planning portal can see how many reports were submitted. And you have things like transport plans, there's like biodiversity net gain reports, there's all sorts of reports that go on, tens and tens and tens. They would all need updating and reconsidering, which would likely mean a fresh planning application. The other reason I say that is the space between the back of the current design and the residential block is set probably at about the limit in terms of if the stand was pushed back any more of additional capacity, it would be quite challenging to keep the residential. And I doubt the club probably want to get rid of the residential. So I suspect that the plans won't change and the capacity will remain the same. But what could change is maybe slight tweaks to the elevation designs, the facades, that kind of thing. And obviously the greater resolution of detail that comes through as it moves through the next stages towards starting on site.
So the capacity is going to change by 5,000. It's going to go up by 5,000 under the current planning. And what you're saying is that it's unlikely that Forest are going to look to tweak that in this same planning process to increase it even further. And so it looks like we're going to go up by 5,000, and any future increase they may want to go for down the line would need another planning application to go from, I think it's going from 5,000 up to 10,000, isn't it? So if they want to go to 15,000, it seems unlikely given what you said about the constraints behind the stand and so on. So it looks like it's going to be, the finished article is going to be, what we get is going to be probably as good as it gets.
I would suggest so. And another reason for that is, of course, as we touched upon earlier, which is why I mentioned it, that Section 106 agreement covers things like contributions to bus services, impacts on local community, crossings, all of those kind of things. It's possible that, say you decided, I'll go back for a 15,000 seat. Well, that's another 5,000 on top of the 5,000. Has that been accounted for in the bus contribution? Do you see what I mean? It's like a Pandora's box. It can just open more and more things, open a can of worms, let's just say. So I think it's unlikely.
Big Arn is with us in the comments. Nice to have you back with us, Big Arn. He's asking, will the new Peter Taylor stand be taller than the Brian Clough stand?
I believe so. I believe this is actually going to become the tallest stand in the stadium. So the roof truss, which kind of picks up the top of the roof and ties back behind the stand to actually keep that new canopy cantilevered, that's actually going to be taller. So this will be quite a beautiful structure, in my opinion, from Trent Bridge. And I think it will really kind of frame that view as you go over and approach the stand from the city.
Now, I know you mentioned that there's no news on the Bridgford, but how is the new Peter Taylor stand going to link on to the existing Bridgford? Is that dip in the corner going to stay for now? Is it possible that will ever go? Will it? Talk to us about how that's going to work and how that's going to look.
Yeah, so just casting my mind back to the plan. So the edge where the proposed Peter Taylor sort of meets that kink of the Bridgeford, they will remain separate structures, at least for now. And there's a small sort of access road down the side of the stand. It's relatively small, but it's an access road. So they will very much remain separate structures for now. And I think later in the slide deck, we'll touch upon actually what a future Bridgeford could look like and what would need to potentially happen to enable that. Okay,
thank you. Richard, did you have anything you want to add on that?
No, he actually was going to go to the Bridgeford because I was going to ask, is there going to be an opportunity for them to start putting all the documents and everything that they need to do for the Planning Commission right now for that Bridgeford? Can they have this sort of one section kind of beginning to get constructed or start the process, and then also have another sort of request going into the council to look at the Bridgeford? Is that even an option to kind of overlap those, if you will?
Well, yeah, I should add, sorry, to Greg's last question about the roof. So again, I know the initial renders showed that the sort of drop was kind of brought up. The simple answer is no. Nothing has gone in on that in the planning portal. And we'll touch upon it later, but I believe Benoit, according to Danny Taylor, had drawn up plans for a sort of extended Bridgeford and taking the roof broadly up to the height of the Brian Clough. But we'll touch upon what would need, or what would likely need to happen to make that happen when we get to it in the slide deck. So what's in the stand? This is a sort of critical one, and for friends of the show that are interested in PSR, this bit's for you. Now, as a Fulham fan myself, the Riverside stand, which opened a couple of years ago and has slowly kind of added capacity and opened various parts, finally opened what we call Fulham Pier a couple of weeks ago, which is the sort of bulk of mass behind the stand that overlooks the River Thames. And that has conferencing facilities in there, has a food hall, lots and lots of, if you like, 7-day-a-week revenue generating offers in that stand. And this is where I see the real sort of plus point to what we're getting. So this is the ground floor plan. You can see obviously the improved turnstiles that sort of shoulder the main players entrance and the players tunnel, which is that spine of red running through the middle. Off of that, you've got the sort of light blue boxes, which are the players changing room. And to the right in the red is the players lounge. Sitting below those are improved toilets, which I think people will be very pleased to hear about. And sitting below those are the staircores, which take members of the public to their general seating up and down the various levels of the building. Interestingly, to the left-hand side in the sort of turquoise color, that's actually going to be, well, as currently proposed, the new club shop, which I think is fantastic because it faces onto the Trent and really capitalizes on those views as you come across Trent Bridge, but also when you're walking down that side of the stadium. And then to the northern part of this plan, so the boxes indicated in the yellow, a great number of them are sort of media suites. There's a media conferencing room. There's also sort of referee changing and other associated rooms that are sort of back of house and concern the sort of backroom operation in running Premier League football matches. If we go to the first floor, next slide, please, Greg.
Sorry, I thought you were staying where you were. There we go.
Right. No, that's all right. Thank you. Yeah, this is the what they call business lounge, I believe. That's the sort of main pinky blob in the middle, which is effectively like hospitality, one would imagine. To the base of that, again, more toilets. You've got kitchens shouldering that either side in the green. On the left-hand side, you've got more club shop space in the blue. And you can see the white area with the curved staircase. That looks to me like that's going to be a mezzanine level. So the club shop's actually going to be over 2 levels. And you can imagine they'll probably hang things down from that double height space, which would be really impressive. And I think a much better club shop than the current one. Not that the current one's bad, because it's actually rather nice. Then if we go on to the next slide, and I should actually mention on the previous slide, we don't need to go back, but there's actually a sensory room for fans with those particular needs. And I think that's really important. And especially for fans with accessible needs as well. This is a much improved stand compared to the current Peter Taylor stand. So the club should be massively lauded for their efforts with that. Then again, on the second floor now, again, more sort of toilets coping with the improved volume of people in this stand. In the middle, I believe, is the sort of VVIP lounge. So that's like the owner's lounge. And either side of that is more sort of business exec lounge space. And then in the pavilion on the left-hand side is what they've labeled retail, but that could mean anything. I suppose that could mean potentially more business lounge space. If it were me in a future life of development of this project, I would look towards Fulham Pier, which has introduced these kind of food hall spaces onto the Thames. And I think that could be a real opportunity for the club to have something like that on the Trent, which is kind of fairly limited at the moment in terms of its F&B offer. And if we go to the next slide, which is the third floor, I believe, this is mainly concourse space for general admission tickets. You can see the sort of 3 purple boxes. There's one at the bottom and 2 either side of the middle. They are sort of bar concessions, so there'll be great swathes of F&B offer in here, much better than the current Peter Taylor stand. Lots and lots of toilets. The stairs that go up and drop you in, they're called vomitories. There's more of them. So it's going to be a much more accessible building, much safer building. And then again, in that pavilion, it looks like there's more retail space. So again, that could be an extension of a restaurant or a lounge space, whatever the club deem that necessary to be in the future, but lots of opportunities for them to explore there. And then if we go to the 4th floor, you can see how it's tiering up, and you've got more concourse space and then a large concession bar, and again, more toilets. So this stand is going to work really hard for the club. And that's why I mentioned about PSR. You know, most of these levels have got bars and concessions in. So the club are going to generate lots of money before the match, lots of money at halftime. And hopefully it will encourage fans to stay after the match and actually have a drink instead of sort of dispersing immediately away. And I can imagine if you've got a great win at the City Ground, that's going to happen more and more. So you're kind of chipping into some of the ideas of the Spurs Stadium and other more modern stands within contemporary stadia. And then if we go to the next slide, that just shows you the overall capacity, so the seating capacity in a sort of aerial view, if you like. And I read on the plans earlier, I think there are about 8,000 standard seats in the stand. And the other 2,000 are made up by the business, the exec lounges, and the various other parties like the players area, the technical area, and some of those back of house media type seats. So 10,000 or so in total and 8,000 or so for general admission. So that's a significant increase on what you've currently got. And then if we go to the next slide, this is an initial aerial overview that the club released, that Benoit, I believe, released maybe back in 2019. And it's not moved on a great deal since then. There've obviously been some changes to the facade. But why I've included this is I thought it's really great to kind of see that pavilion facing the Trent. And I know this is something that the planners were particularly keen on, but I see that becoming a really fantastic destination venue for not just for the club, but also for residents in Rushcliffe and residents in the wider city. Because as I mentioned, there's only a couple of pubs on that stretch of the Trent, both on this side and the other side. And this has a real opportunity to capitalize on that and work itself pretty much around the clock. If we go to the next slide, you can see it again from Trent Bridge. And back to that question earlier, you can kind of get a view there as to how high this thing's going to be. Now, obviously, some of the designs in terms of the facade have changed. I believe they're going to make the steels red to kind of match the Trent end and the Bridgford. And I think that's nice to kind of pick up on those cues. A lot of modern stadiums get criticized for being soulless bowls. Some of the early ones from the 2000s, you know, they sort of nail the cliche of being in a car park. This really isn't that. And this is kind of paying homage to the existing architecture of the stand and picking up on its kind of quirkiness, which I rather like. If we go to the next slide, this is a question I think is quite interesting. So we've touched on it a few times already, but what have the clubs said about future expansion plans? So if we go to the next slide. Thank you, Greg. At committee in June 2025, so the meeting that was held in Rushcliffe Borough Council's offices a couple of weeks ago, the applicant's agent, so that's Forest's agent, who are Savills, I believe, noted the city ground needs to evolve. And the replacement Peter Taylor stand will, and I quote, represent the first step in the city ground's evolution. So that's quite a key line for me. That was the sort of key takeaway, is that they weren't sort of mincing their words there, in that they really see this as the first step, and there are future steps down the line, and that feels imminent. And I think it's good that they put that on record. In September 2024, Mr. Marinakis put on record his desire to expand the capacity of the city ground to 50,000. You can see that image there from BBC Sport at the time. Some of you will have watched his documentary on Sky Sports News, which I believe came out towards the latter part of last year. There are currently no plans detailing what that 50,000 seat capacity city ground will look like. I know we've mentioned that before, but they've not been shared with the public just yet. And there are no further plans for expansion in the planning system, as we've mentioned a few times. However, the club may have been engaging with Rushcliffe in what we call pre-app meetings on plans for the future. So whilst nothing's in the public domain, they almost certainly will have had those conversations offline with planning officers. And this is just a total personal view. There's no insider knowledge in any of what I'm saying. This is just a sort of layman's take, if you like, using my background as an architect. But I would imagine for them to continue with the planning application for the Peter Taylor stand, and to actually get that over the line, and to put that sort of capital investment into that, that they would have had fairly positive conversations with Rushcliffe about future expansion plans. One would imagine. Otherwise, why would you sort of continue? So if we go to the next slide. How has the team changed leading the project? And if you go to the next slide, Greg, I know you touched on this earlier, that on October the 1st, 2024, the club announced that Tom Cartledge, who is a director at Benoit and who was leading the project, both as chairman and on the sort of architectural team, would step down as chairman, and Nicholas Randall Casey would be reinstated into that role. On the 17th of February of this year, Daniel Taylor confirmed Benoit had drawn up plans for the Bridgford stand involving, and I quote, removing the current roof and building a new, higher version that would mean the end of its current lopsided appearance. And I know we touched on that earlier. Daniel Taylor also confirmed a delegation from another architectural firm, Foster and Partners, visited the city ground on October the 21st, 2024. And that's really interesting, because Foster and Partners are, you know, for those of you who are not familiar with what we call sort of starchitects, Foster's, or Norman Foster rather, is probably the sort of alive or most famous architect in the world. Certainly he's almost like the Leo Messi or the Cristiano Ronaldo of football, but for architects. And many of his projects are all over the world. He was the sort of main designer alongside Populous behind Wembley, and he most recently brought out plans for the new Old Trafford. So to have a delegation from Foster's visiting feels significant, but there's no inclination that they've been appointed to take any of this forward. But what is interesting is that on the 12th of June this year, so only a couple of weeks ago, it was confirmed that Konstantinos Chatsimanolis, and I really hope I've pronounced that correctly, had been appointed as a principal executive at Nottingham Forest and the Marinakis Group to drive strategic infrastructure and technology mega projects, aiming to position them as a global leader in sports and entertainment. And that's really interesting because he's coming in at the helm of a sort of trinity of clubs. But really, it seems that the focus is on Forest, and to have someone with the experience as a former principal at Foster and Partners, and he is an architect driving forward this project, feels a very significant and important appointment for the club. And me personally, as a lover of architecture in the built environment, I'm very excited to see how he drives it forward and whom is going to take forward not just the Peter Taylor stand, but all of the other aspects of the ground. So if we go to the next slide, how does the City Ground compare to rival clubs? So I've put together this table, and I think this one's quite important because this shows you more or less Premier League clubs barring Birmingham City, and there's a reason I've included them, in terms of their current capacity and their potential future capacity. And I've put some notes against those as to, is that just kind of press chat, or is that in the planning system, or are they on site? So the obvious ones, you know, Man U, Spurs, the London Stadium, Anfield, the Emirates, Man City, you know, it's kind of following that trend of the clubs, bar West Ham, that are in and around the top six or considered so. Manchester City are actively constructing an expansion to one of their stands, which is very near completion. That will take them up to 62,000, in and around 62,000. You will also maybe have seen the news surrounding Villa Park. So Villa Park's currently at around 43,000, and the club have gone in to planning with a fresh application for a new, I believe it's the North Stand, which will take them to above 50,000. Now, Leeds a couple of weeks ago also submitted plans for an expanded Ellen Road. So that's 2 new stands, or rather retrofits of the existing ground, taking them up to 53,000 from 37,800 or 900. And then you've got Crystal Palace, who are going from sort of 25,000 up to 34,000. And that's an imminent start on site expected. So we're expecting that to actually construction to start very soon on that. And then, of course, you've got Birmingham City. So Birmingham City recently bought, I believe, a couple of years ago by an American billionaire. There's an Amazon series coming out soon following that progression, obviously down to League One, now back in the Championship. But he is driving forward a major project for a 62,000-seater stadium, working with the Mayor of the West Midlands to secure funding for infrastructure upgrades, a new train station. And what this all points towards, and the reason I'm sort of highlighting this, is that very soon 50,000 will become the sort of new 30,000 for a good 10 or 12 clubs potentially in the Premier League. And with the likes of Sunderland now promoted, that's nearly another 50,000-seater stadium in the Premier League. So in the age of PSR and revenue generation, I often see online Forest fans saying, oh, gradual progression, we'll start at 35,000. We won't get 45,000. We'll only get 45,000 or 50,000 for bigger matches. I'm not so sure about that. I personally disagree. I think Forest are a massive club, and I think the fans generally are quite humble about their successes and their size. Let's not forget Forest have 2 Champions Leagues amongst many other trophies, and pretty much everywhere in the world where you mention Nottingham, it's known for 3 things: Robin Hood, Brian Clough, and Nottingham Forest. Everyone knows who you are. And with the success you enjoyed last season, which hopefully continues, long into the future, the club is only going to garner more attention. And the younger fan bases coming through, the newer fans that have children, these are all people that are going to want to go to games in the next 10, 15, 20 years. The stadium's got to be prepared for that. So the point I'm trying to make is, yes, 35,000 is a good start, but we also need to be conscious of where everybody else is going. Next slide, please, Greg. So yeah, this is just an image of Ellen Road, and you can see how those 2 new stands are looking. They're obviously going to go for the larger one on the side first, and I believe they've put in an outline application for the other one. And if we go to the next slide, that kind of shows you just how big that actually is. And we'll come back to that in a moment. And then if you go to the next slide, this is what Villa are doing at Villa Park. So they're actually retrofitting an existing stand, which I think is a really impressive approach. And if we go to the next slide, these diagrams actually show you how they're retrofitting what they've got. So they're taking an existing stand, they're adding on to the sides, to the cheeks, and they're adding on towards the ground and filling in those corners. They're also putting on a new roof structure, and they're losing some of their hospitality in place of greater general admission to get up to that figure of about 50,000. This is something that's interesting because potentially in the future, this is something that could be done to the Trent end. Now, I'm not saying there's an appetite to do that, but there is a possibility that something like this could be done later down the line, subject to appetite from the club and the planners. If we go to the next slide, this is the one we were sort of touching on earlier. So if the Bridgford next, then how? So this diagram is obviously the master plan of the club, and the area indicated in red is the area I often see sort of hatched online on forums, on Twitter, about these are the houses the club would need to buy. So this is on Austin Road, the junction off of Colic Road. And that sort of hatched area, more or less, is, as discussed online, the broad outline of properties that the club would need to purchase in order to kind of back into. And I know that they own a couple, 2 or 3, I believe, off the top of my head. However, if you go to the next slide, in my opinion, and it is just an opinion, of course, I think the club would realistically, if they were going up to 50,000, would probably need to purchase almost all of the properties from Scarrington Road on the right, down towards where the sort of timber yard is, John A. Stevens and the McDonald's, and across and up Colic Road. And the reason I say that, as we'll sort of come into that, is when you're adding thousands and thousands and tens of thousands more people, it's not just the size of the stand. It's also all that external concourse space. Now, when you chaps have been to the ground, if you've ever been in the Brian Clough or the Bridgford stand, when the ground is pushing out after the game is finished, those car parks become full of people. And it is kind of, you're at a canter following other people. If you just sort of filled that void with stand and there was no concourse space, it could be a disaster. So it does need to consider more than just the space of the stand. It's actually all of the concourse space that goes around it. So if you go to the next slide, if we imagine that the club bought all of that and potentially demolished those houses, that's the sort of space you're left with. And if you go to the next slide, what we've done is just to overlay the latest plans for Ellen Road, which show, broadly speaking, what an expanded Bridgford and Brian Clough may look like. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see that redacted and drawn over the kind of current site. And these are the sort of capacities that would get you up to about 50,000. So the capacity of the Bridgford would double to nearly 15,000, and you'd be looking at something like an 18,000 seater Brian Clough. But you can see from Ellen Road there just how big that actually is. And it straddles land that the club don't own. It straddles boat clubs. It also straddles the canal. So you'd need to culvert the canal, which means to kind of build over the canal. You'd probably need to look at procuring the site of the Environment Agency and turning all of that into concourse space, which personally, on a personal level, I think is what the club should do. But again, whether there's an appetite to do that, because that's a major project, a major capital investment project, we just don't know. But being realistic to get up to that level without changing the current capacity of the proposed Peter Taylor and the Trent end, this is the sort of thing you'd need to consider doing. So if we go to the next slide and just focus on the Bridgford, you can see that in isolation. That's kind of what that looks like. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see the site as cleared, but with the houses. And you can see that little chink in the corner overlapping Austin Road, which is why I mentioned earlier, it doesn't just stop at where the stand finishes. It's also all of the other aspects. So that's why I think such a large quantum of property would need to be purchased. And yes, that would cost a lot of money, but it would cost a lot less money than moving. If we go to the next slide, just to sort of round off that conversation, what do we think happens next? And I was thinking about this yesterday, and I was trying to think how best we could frame it. So I've come up with an analogy, and it's probably going to be terrible, but it sounded good in the shower this morning. You live close to London, Greg, and hopefully this lands with yourself, Richard, and fellow Forest fans from across the Atlantic. In London, let's just say, for example, Greg and his wife own a 2-bedroom house, and Greg's decides that he wants some additional family to come live. Let's just say parents, for example, and he puts in planning permission for an extension on his ground floor. So he needs more kitchen space. He needs greater living accommodation because there's going to be more people living in the house. Great. Puts that into the planning system. And the planners say, yeah, great, that's fine. You can extend your house like that. And Greg knows that in his loft, he can create an additional bedroom for those 2 extra people. But then all of a sudden, Greg's wife says, that's a great idea. Our parents get on really well. I want them to come and live with us as well. And he now needs to create 2 bedrooms in that loft. And in certain parts of London, it's acceptable to actually put a room in the loft and actually push the front of the house out as well and create 2 rooms. But in some parts of London, it's not. You can only have that additional 1 room. So for Greg, in that particular situation, subject to planning, he may or may not be able to stay in that house, subject to what the planners say. If they say he can put those additional 2 rooms in, great, he can stay. But if he can't, he then needs to consider moving in order to make that dream a reality. And the reason I say that is because Forest clearly have this number of 50,000 in their mind, and they are going to have to consider those further expansions, in my opinion, before they put a spade in the ground. You wouldn't, for example, build the extension on the back of the house or do part of a loft conversion without knowing if you can do the rest, if that makes sense. It doesn't make sense to do that. So what I see as happening in the next sort of 3 years, potentially, is that the club have to consider those additional expansions to the ground. And I'm not saying I don't have any inside knowledge whatsoever. I could be totally wrong. They might start on site next year if they can get this boat club resolved. But in my, layman's professional opinion, if you like, I believe that they will need to explore further expansions before they start work, because it would be mad just to increase by 5,000 and then find out you actually can't expand anymore. There's no appetite to support such an expansion. So that's where I think we're at, and it's an exciting time for the club. These are momentous projects that take many, many years to create. And if you look at other clubs, Fulham started their process in 2012, I believe. We had a proposal from Thomas Heatherwick, the same guy who designed the Olympic Cauldron in 2012. That then got junked and Populous came on board. And now it's finally opened in 2025. So you're looking at a nearly 13-year long process. And you guys are only 6 years in. Now, I'm not saying it's going to take that long, but for those people who are maybe a bit impatient, that's just how long these things can take. So strap yourselves in.
Well, Matt, I can't thank you enough for taking us through such a fantastic presentation again that really spells out so much in terms of what the stand can be, what it is going to hopefully turn out to be, and all the inside of the stand stuff, the media suites, the new changing rooms, the potential for retail, and all the other stuff you're taking us through. And if anyone that might have joined us on this stream a bit late, I encourage you to go back and watch from the start, because you'll get a real flavor of everything. And any of us that have got any questions or have had any questions or thoughts as to the ins and outs of all of this Peter Taylor stand development. It feels like you've answered so much of that here already. There's a few questions in the comments, and I'm conscious of time, Matt, as well, because I don't want to kind of like go on and on too much. But Gary Robinson asks, is there anything in your opinion that has been deemed obsolete since the 2022 plan?
It's a good question. Well, I would say actually that the 2022 plan is more or less the 2019 plan. And that's what I was kind of hinting at earlier, really, is that not much has changed really since these plans were first proposed. And you guys have been on such a journey in that time. You're now an established Premier League club, and you're kind of considered towards the top half, and you're playing in Europe next season. Long may all of that continue. So whilst those concept designs are great, and Benoit, the club, and all the stakeholders that have got them to that point should be highly commended for their efforts, there's now an opportunity to evolve them even more. And that's in the next layer of detail. So it's not that anything's obsolete as such. I sort of view it on the flip side that now you've got a real opportunity. You've got this concept that design approved. How can we take it to the next level? And that's where I see this guy from Foster's, Konstantinos, coming in and actually potentially taking the current designs to the next level. And that's what I see as being really exciting about this project.
I want to say firstly as well, a big hello to that Gary Baldy nerd. He was actually in the comments waiting right before we even set off tonight. So he's in the comments. Thank you to you for joining. Ian points out that there are some, in his words, really belligerent people in some of the houses behind the Bridgford stand. And I mentioned in my opening that there's been a lot of pushback from local residents, and you know it's very easy to ignore them and say, well, like I kind of flippantly said, the stadium's always been there, and if you move in next door to a stadium, then what do you expect? But putting that to one side, can you understand to a certain degree the thoughts of these residents that have raised objections, Matt?
Yes and no. It's a personal one for me, Greg, because I grew up in central London. So I grew up not too far away from Wandsworth Bridge, and that's relatively close to Stamford Bridge and also Craven Cottage. And so I'm quite used to road closures in London, and the way London works is very much the bigger principle of the city takes precedence over anything else. So, you know, like an international institution like Chelsea Football Club, and I wish Fulham were the same. I suppose they kind of are, but you know, it's not gonna stop because of a couple of complaints. But I also really sympathise with people who struggle with the idea of people parking in front of their house. The same thing happens to me here, but at the same time, I have chosen to live here. So I've chosen to be in this area, and as a consequence of that, I have to manage that. But because I'm a Londoner and I'm used to it, I don't view it the way other people do. And that's not to say that their opinion's wrong. It's just that mine is maybe different.
I'd quickly add before Richard comes in that whilst you're a Fulham fan raised and born in London, you live in West Bridgford, so you should be, you know, you are local to Nottingham. So you know your insight comes from a place of living in the area with your good partner, and so I feel like you've got a big soft spot for Forest as well. I know you've got a big soft. You've said that time and time again, but I think Richard wanted to come in as well.
No, I'm just curious, like what that process goes like. I mean, we have eminent domain legalities here in the U.S. I think most of those usually are around like transportation projects or things that are like kind of more, I wouldn't say recreational, but sort of less recreational, right, than a stadium. So how does that work in terms of what Marinakis can do or what the club can do to try to secure that sort of area? Because I know, as you've just been talking about, it could be a significant amount of pushback from that, but I'm just curious how that works.
Yeah, there is usually a significant amount of pushback. The same happened over here, Richard, with a project we call HS2. So the government at the time instructed the HS2 board to obviously design a route from London to Birmingham and onwards. And lots of land was kind of put aside. Some of it had housing on. That land was purchased. People were moved on, etc., etc. That happens usually through either negotiation, or if it can't be negotiated, it then goes to what we call a compulsory purchase order, which is effectively where there is political support to instruct the purchase of that land or property in light of the greater good, whatever that looks like, whether that's a major infrastructure project like a new train line or a hospital, or in this case, a stadium. And sort of to touch on Greg's point, yeah, I do live here. I absolutely love living here. Not just because Nottingham's a great city and this is a nice area within a nice city, in my opinion. But also I chose to be here because I'm a lover of sport. You know, I've got Trent Bridge, rugby, football, all on my doorstep. And that for me is a big appeal. And I love, you know, I grew up next to 2 Premier League stadiums, and I've seen the positive benefits they can bring. And if you asked any resident in Fulham now who lives relatively close to the stadium and has bought one of those very expensive houses on the streets near Craven Cottage, do they like Fulham Pier? I bet a significant number of them would say absolutely. And has the headache of the stand redevelopment been worth it? Probably yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, we've just gone past the hour mark. We're not done just yet. Like I said, I could sit here for the next 10, 15, 20 minutes thanking you for everything you've just done, because it is remarkable and it makes so much sense. The way you present it is just so good. And, you know, I think a comment that I put up from Rob was that this deserves a wider audience. So we're gonna push it out as much as we can, and hopefully fellow Forest fans, not quite from across the Atlantic, who are also fanatics, will be able to view and see what you've given us. I want to put a quick word for the cheese trader up to say that Stu Freestone, the legend that is our sponsor, he's in York. He is available for all of your cheesy goods. All right. I've had quite a few off him, I have to say, because he's just so good. You can get 10% off when you place an order and when you quote and you mention Talking Reds, and that's not a one-time thing, that's an every time thing. So if you fancy some cheese, all the details are in the bio. All right, we're going to end with one of my tenable quizzes, guys. So as we were talking about the stadium, I have put together a little tenable quiz, the 10 smallest stadiums in Premier League history. So I want you guys, please, to take it in turns. We're going to start with Richard. And so this is Premier League history. So the smallest is obviously the one at the top. I've given you clues by their capacity. I'm not quite sure if this is right on Matt Street or not. Isn't it? He probably knows every single one of them. Or maybe not.
Quite nervous.
It's just for a bit of fun to finish things off. So Greg's tenable quiz, the 10 smallest stadiums in Premier League history. And I should I be fussy and demand the name of the stadium? Maybe. I kind of might agree that if you can't think of the name of the stadium, but you can remember the name of the club, I kind of will go with that. But Richard, over to you first. Give us a stadium.
Those wicked and awful cherries. I'm going to say Bournemouth.
You're going to say Bournemouth. Can you remember the name of the stadium? By any chance?
Terrible with things like that.
It's
Matt probably knows it. Vitality.
The Vitality Stadium. Let's see if the Vitality Stadium, Bournemouth, is tenable. It's rising. It's rising. It certainly is. It is the smallest stadium in Premier League history. With 11,307. I've been. It's very, very nice to a certain degree, but they're also looking to expand. I read recently and get their numbers up. But we move on. Matt, over to you. What's your thought on this for a first go?
I'm going to go for, and I know it will land where it lands, but I think 17,250. I think is Brentford's G-Tech Community Stadium.
Let's have a look. The G-Tech Community Stadium. I've got to type this all in, you see. Bear with me, folks. Is the G-Tech tenable? And is it the 17,250? It is. So 2 for 2 at the moment. Okay. Richard, back to you. 1 point each.
I'm going to say the American Express Stadium with for Brighton.
The Amex.
Yeah.
Is the Amex tenable? Let's have a look. I've been to the Amex as well as there last season, and I'm afraid it isn't tenable. It's got a pretty good capacity. I think it's about the same as what Forest's is. I think it's up at nearly the 30,000 mark or thereabouts. But I'll have to look that up. So no point there, Richard. Matt, over to you.
I feel like I wasn't born, so I'm kind of giving away my age here a little bit. But I'm going to go for Oldham Athletic, and I don't know the name of the stadium, I'm afraid.
You don't know Boundary Park. Boundary Park, Oldham Athletic. Let's have a look. Is this tenable? Could it be? Could it be? It's rising. It is. Oldham Athletics, Boundary Park, third on the list, and that's 13,513. Now then, Richard, I need you to think very carefully about this. You think very, very carefully about this and rivalries and hatred and all that kind of stuff.
I think I've got one.
Go on.
And I don't remember the name of it, which is terrible, but it's Derby County's stadium.
Baseball ground.
Do you mean the original?
Yeah. Is that right?
Well, let's have a look. The baseball ground. Is that on there? Let's have a look. Is the baseball ground on there? The baseball ground is on there. Okay. Well done. Baseball ground is on there. Over to you, Matt. You're doing rather well pair of you at the moment. Only one miss, I think, so far.
I'm going to go Crazy Gang. I'm going to go Wimbledon. I'm going to go Plough Lane.
Oh, that's not a bad shout, Plough Lane. Back at Plough Lane now, of course, after years of being away. It's Plough Lane on the list. The tenable's rising. It's going up. I'm afraid no. Plough Lane is not tenable. So, guys, think about the capacity. I can start giving you some clues. Like I said, Richard, a big rivalry. Again, recent rivalry might help you. Some of these teams obviously aren't in the Premier League anymore, such as Oldham, for example.
Oh, yeah. I was going to say, well, are you talking about Luton?
I don't know. You tell me.
Luton. Well, before I do that, I want to say the Dell. I think the Dell's on here.
You want to? Okay, so you've mentioned two there, and you've possibly given an idea to Matt. So
it's all right. I'll hand one over to Matt.
You want to say the Dell?
The Dell.
I've been to the Dell. I've been to the Dell many times because I was in Gospel. So I've been to the Dell. The Dell is tenable. It's number 4 on the list with a very small capacity, about 15,200. Matt, did you want to take Richard's guinea, or have you got your own idea?
I've got two beginning with F, and funny enough, I was actually at one of them earlier today by pure coincidence, not for an actual visit to it, but the first one is Filbert Street, the old Leicester Stadium.
The old Leicester. Are you going with that one? Let's have a look. Filbert Street. Is that tenable? Doesn't look like it's going to be. No. Filbert Street. No. Don't forget the 10th on the list is 21,088. So, that might help. It might not help. Back to you then, Richard. Did you want to go with your other mention you said?
But I don't remember the name. I mean, I can't believe I can't remember the name of it.
It's where the
Luton
dogs
Towns.
Kenilworth Road.
Kenilworth Road, yes. Goodness gracious.
Road. Let's have a look and see if Kenilworth Road at 12,056 is indeed tenable. Yes, famously really small, and you walk through multiple people's back gardens to get in there as well. So, okay, guys, there's 4 to get. For those listening, we've got the Vitality, the Kenilworth Road, Boundary Park, the Dell. Then there's 2 missing, and then G-Tech and Baseball Ground, and another 2 at the bottom. I'm back with you, Matt, aren't I? Have you got another guess for me, please, sir?
I have indeed. I'm going to go for our friends in Pompey, Fratton Park.
Again, having grown up in the area, I've been to Fratton Park multiple times. It used to be, I remember going there when they played Spurs in the Cup. So no, they've had quite a good capacity over the years. I mean, they lost several stands in a row, but I think that yeah, that when they were in the Premier League was definitely over the 25,000 mark or thereabouts. So no, it's not tenable. So we might be running out of guesses shortly. Richard, I'm back to you.
Oh my goodness! trying to think of historical clubs that were
one of these
in the
teams
Premier League.
were in the very first ever Premier League, and I think they got relegated in that first season and haven't been seen since. Another team came up surprisingly.
No.
Another team came up surprisingly, and I think lasted this season, maybe two.
In Stoke City?
Are you going with Stoke City? Is that your answer?
Yeah.
Stoke City. That would be what Roker Park, wouldn't it? Probably. That was theirs, wasn't it? Roker Park was their old one, wasn't it?
I think that's right.
Yeah, Roker Park. Is it Roker Park? I'm afraid not.
Bugger.
Roker Park. Comments. Ian, the comments said Filbert Street. The Vitality has 2 stands made of scaffolding. Yeah, something like that. It certainly does. Matt?
Oh, I'm torn between sort of like Preston, North End, or like the old Blackburn Stadium. I can't remember where.
Preston haven't been in the Premier League.
No.
I'll help you with that.
I'm going to go with Blackburn then.
So that's Ewood. Oh, no, it's doing the same thing. No, we timed out. Yeah, it doesn't let me know on this thing I'm using the how many guesses you got left, but it does say the round is over due to too many incorrect answers.
Is Loftus Road one of those?
Ewood Park is not, and Gordon's right. Roker Park was Sunderland. As I said, Roker Park. I knew it wasn't Stoke; it was Sunderland. It's on the tip of my tongue, and someone will tell me in the comments what Stoke was. So apologies for that misstep. It wasn't tenable anyway. But let's go through the answers then. So at the bottom, you've got the Swansea City Stadium, which was known as the Liberty. You've got above that Loftus Road in London, which is very much the old Subbuteo set type stadium. 16,220. This is the team that I touched on that came up from the Championship out of nowhere. Bit of a bogey team for Forest. That's Blackpool, and that's Bloomfield Road. And then the one above that, the last one, just below the Dell, they played one season in the Premier League. It's the county ground of Swindon Town. So there's a Liberty. There's Loftus Road, Bloomfield Road.
That was tough.
There we go. I thought, we were talking stadiums and architecture and capacity and all that kind of stuff. And tenable is my new favourite thing to do at the end of a Talking Reds episode. So there we go. Listen, it's been absolutely fantastic, Matt. You are a true friend to the show. And we'll have you back again at the right time to give us another fresh update. But just before you leave us, anything you'd like to add?
No, likewise, chaps. Thank you for having me back. And I'm really excited for next season. I know there's a lot of uncertainty surrounding Forest at the minute, but I wish you all the best. I think you're going to absolutely blitz the Europa. I'm excited to see your new signings, and hopefully my own Fulham can sort of kick on from last season as well. So I'll be cheering on sort of both FFCs, if that makes sense.
It does indeed. Just before we depart as well.
As ever, we're super grateful for your support. Please hit like and subscribe. Or if you're listening on Apple or Spotify, you can follow us to be sure to never miss a Talking Reds episode.
I'm Richard over in Oklahoma. You okay, mate? We got through it.
We got through it. We're good.
We got through it.
We're good. Yeah.
Richard doesn't mean things too well, folks. And he come on. And listen, if you're not with me, I feel like I'm losing a left arm or something. So, Richard, thank you very much, buddy.
Yeah, thank you. By the way, that shirt looks beautiful. It's funny. Yeah. At first glance, I was like, when it was all kind of being thrown out there, and this is going to be the shirt for the season, I thought there was a lot of flack from fans about it. But I've actually quite enjoyed watching our team play in that shirt, and I think it looks fantastic.
Best we've had in years.
I think you might be right.
Just to say, I'm normally an XL, folks. I'm going to be very, very honest with you here. I'm normally an XL, right? I'm a little bit too much around the tummy at the moment. So I got the XL. And it is a slim fit. And in fact, you know what? It fitted well, but it was just a little bit too much for me on the tummy. So I did send it back, and I have got 2XL on. I'm not going to lie, and it fits perfectly. There's plenty of room to breathe. So for all of you that haven't purchased yet, just bear in mind, if you've got a little bit extra going on around the waist area in your later years, as I have, then bear that in mind. It is a bit more of a snugger fit. So there we go. But yes, Orlando's got his full kit. His shorts and socks came today, so he's chuffed to bits as well. And yeah, they look great. It was 0-0 today, another boring friendly. But listen, it is just preseason. It's about fitness. Gibbs White played, and then he came off at the end, and half time, I should say. And you know, will he stay? Will he go? We're not sure. But we're going to be back on Monday. Richard and I will be with Scott from Down Under's joining us. Jamie Martin, who is currently also Down Under. He's going to be joining us as well. And the pub landlord, Alan Merriweather, will be back with us. So we'll have a 5-hander midday British Standard Time on Monday with all the latest news. And we'll see what's happened at that point with Gibbs White, with Dan Ndoye and those rumours and all the other things that could be going on. In the meantime, thank you for tuning in to Talking Reds. This has been the third one with the sleeper architect, Matt Drewitt.
Come join Greg and Richard right here on Talking Red.